Shinjuku is built on overlap. It is a ward-level administrative name, a set of postal codes, a commercial gravity well, and a daily choreography of millions of bodies passing through concrete corridors that were never designed to feel quiet. Even late at night, the district resists emptiness. Street-level light reflects off polished signage and wet asphalt. Above, rail lines fold across each other like exposed tendons. Below, there is another city, ventilated, tiled, numbered, timed. Every major rail system in Tokyo has a relationship with Shinjuku, the JR lines that divide into outward prefectures, the private railways that funnel commuters into the center and return them to the edge, and the subway, which does not announce itself with a horizon, but with stairs. Subway stations are not simply stops, they are machines for absorbing crowds, distributing them, and making their movement feel voluntary. It is in that underground, where the surface no longer offers orientation, that a set of stories has persisted for decades, stories that present themselves not as folklore, but as a technical afterimage, a line that does not appear on maps, a platform that exists but is not served, a tunnel that engineers refer to only in half sentences, a name used rarely and never in print, passed between maintenance workers and certain police units, the Shinjuku Night Line. The title sounds informal, almost like a nickname. That is part of its durability. In rail systems, unofficial names are often the truest. They come from what workers actually see, not what agencies approve. To understand why any forbidden infrastructure could exist beneath one of the most observed urban districts on Earth, it helps to begin with an ordinary fact. The underground of Shinjuku is already crowded with structures that are not meant to be remembered. Utility galleries, cable trenches, storm drains, old foundations, wartime reinforcement, post-war service ducts, dead-end corridors from station renovations, sealed staircases that once led to ticket gates no longer present. Tokyo's subsoil is a history of decisions made under pressure, then covered. In Japan, modern rail success is inseparable from failure. Accidents are treated as engineering lessons and public trauma. The language of safety is detailed, bureaucratic, and relentless. Yet the same culture that documents incident reports with precision also has an instinct for silence when the matter touches certain thresholds: security, public confidence, liability, and the national preference for orderly narratives. Shinjuku, in particular, has always been a zone where official clarity gives way to controlled ambiguity. The station complex has been rebuilt and expanded so many times that its true geometry exists only in architectural plans and maintenance databases. A person can traverse from one side to the other without ever seeing daylight, passing through retail concourses that feel public but are privately managed, through passages that change names depending on which company's signage is currently installed. Even for locals, disorientation is common. For outsiders, it can feel like being processed. The Nightline stories begin in the late 1960s and early 1970s, during the years when Tokyo was remodeling itself into a modern capital at unprecedented speed. The city's economic rhythm demanded mass transit that could operate longer, carry more people, and remain resilient under disaster conditions. The underground became not only a transportation solution, but an urban insurance policy. If the surface was compromised by weather, by fire, by unrest, the city could still move. This period is a real documented turning point in Tokyo's infrastructure history. Subway projects were planned with more than passenger convenience in mind. They accounted for air handling, emergency egress, flood management, and the politics of land acquisition above. Every new tunnel negotiated with existing tunnels. Every station expansion negotiated with the fact that the earth beneath Shinjuku was already occupied. From the beginning, planners faced a contradiction that is easy to state and difficult to solve. You cannot build a new underground city without creating spaces that will never be used as intended. Temporary shafts become permanent voids. Emergency passages become storage. Staging tunnels become abandoned. The more complex the system becomes, the more it relies on hidden redundancies. In public documents, redundancy is framed as resilience. In worker language, redundancy becomes another word: the places you don't go. The Night Line is described in its most restrained form as one of those redundancies that exceeded its intended scope. A partial line built for operational reasons, moving empty trains, relocating rolling stock, providing a bypass during maintenance closures, then sealed from passenger access after a sequence of events that made continued use politically impossible. No one claims it was built to transport the public. The stories insist on the opposite, that it was never supposed to be seen, and that, for a short time, it was. The first references to something like the Night Line tend to surface in two places: informal interviews with retired railway employees and the fringe margins of urban exploration communities who trade in maps that are always just one edit away from being credible. The second category is unreliable by nature. The first category is more disturbing precisely because it is not dramatic. When older maintenance workers speak about unlisted spaces, they rarely describe ghosts. They describe doors that are always locked, corridors with no signage, platform edges that are not painted with warning stripes because no passenger is supposed to stand there. They describe air that feels stale even with ventilation. They describe a particular sound, the low, irregular pressure of distant trains moving through spaces that are not in the public imagination. It is not what they say that carries weight. It is what they refuse to elaborate on. The Shinjuku area has legitimate reasons for hidden rail infrastructure. Train yards near the center are limited. Trains must be stored, repositioned, and serviced in a network that is already saturated. There are also issues of crowd control. Shinjuku has long been associated with nightlife districts, with policing challenges, with missing persons reports that do not always resolve cleanly, with late-night intoxication and the quiet violence of urban anonymity. Rail operators have historically adjusted service patterns and station management to respond to these realities. A bypass line that could move equipment without sending it through main platforms makes sense. A service tunnel that can be used during disruptions makes sense. A platform built to relieve overcrowding, then closed when it proves unsafe, also makes sense. None of this requires the supernatural. But what begins to set the Night Line apart is the specificity of the unease attached to it. Most closed infrastructure becomes mundane. It turns into storage, wiring, pipes. The Night Line, by contrast, is treated as contaminated in a social sense. Workers talk about it with the cautious tone used for a place associated with death, not in a sensational way, but in the manner of someone describing an occupational hazard they cannot file away. The earliest and most consistent element in accounts is the timing. The line is not described as permanently active. It is described as something that operated at night, after last trains, before first trains, during a window when passenger traffic was minimal and the subway could be reconfigured like a workshop. Tokyo's rail systems have always depended on nighttime maintenance. When service ends, teams move in. Track inspection, power checks, cleaning, rail grinding, signal testing. The city sleeps while the tunnels remain alive. In those hours, the rules change. Lighting is altered. Certain gates are unlocked. Temporary barriers are moved. The human presence is sparse, fragmented into small crews. Radios crackle. Footsteps become unusually loud, and the sense of scale changes. The station that feels crowded at 6 p.m. becomes cavernous at 1 a.m. It is in that altered state, the stories say, that the Night Line appeared. A second element is geographic. The line is associated not with a single station, but with the complex under and around Shinjuku Station and the surrounding network of underground passages. Shinjuku is close to other major nodes, Yoyogi, Sendagaya, Okubo, and it sits within reach of lines that run east-west and north-south. Any unlisted connector tunnel in this area could theoretically touch multiple systems. That interconnectivity is an engineering advantage and a security concern. A third element is administrative. The line is said to fall into the seam between companies and agencies, spaces where responsibility is shared and therefore diluted. Tokyo's rail landscape is not a single unified system. It is a negotiated coexistence of operators with different priorities and records. The seams between them can create blind spots where maintenance is performed, but history is not discussed. And then there is the fourth element, the one that makes the Nightline story persist in spite of its logistical improbability: the incidents. The incidents are never presented as one catastrophic disaster with a memorial plaque. They are described as a cluster of smaller events: injuries, disappearances, a train that entered a tunnel and returned with fewer crew members than it left with, an equipment movement that triggered an emergency response at a time when no passengers were present. In these accounts, the absence of a public disaster is not reassuring. It is the reason the story is frightening. If something happens underground at night and it does not break the surface, it can be managed as a problem rather than a tragedy. It can be handled internally. It can be dissolved into paperwork. When you listen closely to the way people describe forbidden infrastructure, you realize the fear is not of ghosts. It is a procedure. It is of the fact that a place can become so problematic that institutions decide, quietly, to stop acknowledging it, because acknowledgement would require action that cannot be contained. The Shinjuku Night Line is framed in those accounts as a piece of infrastructure that crossed that boundary, not because it was haunted in any theatrical sense, but because something about its operation produced outcomes that could not be explained to the public without exposing the limits of control. That is the underlying horror of modern transit systems. They are trusted because they work, and when they do not work, the failure is normally visible. An announcement, a delay, a line of commuters standing under fluorescent lights staring at their phones. But the failures that occur off-schedule, off-camera, and off-record do not become part of public memory. They become part of worker culture. They become rumors that sound like superstition until you notice that the people telling them are not looking for attention. They are looking for distance. The first time the Night Line is said to have been used in a way that intersected with the public was not during a crisis that made headlines. It was during a planned operational adjustment, a short-lived attempt to relieve congestion by routing certain late-night movements differently. The explanation given at the time, in internal language, was technical: traffic smoothing, maintenance windows, rolling stock repositioning. The public saw nothing. The city continued. But below Shinjuku, the stories say, there was a night when a platform light turned on in a place it had not been lit before, and a train arrived with its interior lights dimmed as if it were in service, even though it carried no passengers. A small group of workers watched it stop, doors closed, no announcement, no visible driver in the front window. They waited for a signal that did not come. Then the train departed, deeper into the system, and the sound of it lingered longer than it should have, as if the tunnel ahead was longer than the plans suggested. That is how these stories begin, not with a scream, with a discrepancy in distance, with a piece of machinery behaving as if it knows a route that humans are not supposed to remember. In rail systems, distance is a form of evidence. A train moving through a tunnel produces predictable signatures: time between signal blocks, changes in electrical load, the way sound returns through ventilation ducts, the subtle shift in air pressure felt through platform barriers. Engineers and operators learn these signatures by repetition. When the signature changes, it is not immediately fear, it is diagnostic. Something is wrong with the tunnel, the train, the timetable, or the measurement. The Night Line accounts insist that the first clear warning was not visual, it was temporal. A movement that should have taken seconds took minutes. A train that should have reached a crossover did not appear. A crew radioed in, then stopped responding. The control room watched indicator lights that were supposed to change state remain fixed, as if the train were suspended between blocks. When it finally emerged, it did so at an unexpected point in the network. This is where the story begins to feel less like rumor and more like an operational nightmare. Because even if you dismiss every supernatural claim, the core premise is still plausible. An undocumented or poorly documented connector tunnel exists, and its integration into active operations produces anomalies in timing and tracking, especially in a period when signaling technology, record-keeping, and system interoperability were not what they are now. In the late 1960s and 1970s, subway signaling in Japan was sophisticated compared to many countries, but it was also in transition. Automatic train control and other safety systems were evolving across networks. Older sections relied on a mixture of track circuits, relay logic, and human procedure. Newer sections added layers of automation. Interconnections, particularly those involving service tunnels, emergency bypasses, or shared rights of way, could become complicated in ways that paper plans did not adequately convey to night crews. In an era before unified digital mapping, the system was not always a single, coherent object. It was a negotiated patchwork, and the patchwork had edges. The Night Line is described as existing on one of those edges. The technical descriptions that appear in worker recollections are not cinematic. They are the kind of details that come from someone who spent a career inside tunnel constraints. Curvature limits for rolling stock, the reasons certain connectors cannot be used at speed, the way water intrusion changes ballast behavior, the way concrete segments behave under differential settlement. These details matter because they plate to a specific kind of horror. The underground is not stable, it is managed, and management can fail. Shinjuku sits on complex geology, and the district's density means underground construction must account for existing foundations, deep basements, and older tunnels. When a new subway tunnel is bored, it cannot simply take the most direct route. It bends around obstacles, it passes under and over other lines, it changes depth. Each change introduces engineering compromises, gradients that affect braking, curves that increase flange wear, ventilation demands that increase heat retention, access points that must be hidden within already crowded station footprints. A night line used for non-passenger movements could, in theory, accept compromises that a passenger line could not. It could be steeper, tighter, less forgiving because it is not meant to carry crowds. It could also be built with different assumptions about maintenance access and emergency evacuation. These assumptions become dangerous if the line is ever used in conditions beyond what it was designed for. One of the most persistent claims about the Night Line is that its tunnel profile differs from standard passenger tunnels, not dramatically, just enough to matter. A slightly narrower clearance, service walkways that are discontinuous, alcoves where equipment was staged during construction and never removed, a drainage channel that is deeper than usual, forcing crews to move single file on uneven surfaces. In the accounts, these details are not presented as secrets, they are presented as inconveniences that became normalized until something happened. The early warnings, according to those accounts, appeared as a pattern of minor failures that were easy to dismiss. Door faults that occurred only on certain movements, signal irregularities that resolved when the train exited a particular section, unexplained brake dust accumulation on specific axles, a recurring smell, ozone, overheated insulation, reported by crews who could not identify a source. In a modern system, such patterns would trigger systematic investigation. In a system under expansion pressure, they can be absorbed into the background noise of constant work. The Shinjuku area also has another reality that complicates any technical narrative. Nighttime is not empty. Even after last trains, station complexes are occupied by cleaners, security guards, maintenance crews, and subcontractors. Some are employed directly by rail operators, many are not. They move through access-controlled corridors, sometimes guided by temporary signage and work lights. Their presence is essential, but it also creates a vulnerability. A large number of people are in restricted spaces at hours when oversight is lighter and when fatigue and routine make anomalies easier to miss. In Nightline accounts, the first truly disturbing event is often described as a wrong entry. A worker, usually a cleaner or a subcontracted maintenance person, walks through a door they have used before and finds themselves in a corridor that should not be there. The architecture changes subtly. Older tile, different paint, a longer stretch of passage before the next junction. The worker continues because the mind prefers continuity. Then the corridor opens into a platform space with no signage and no ticket gates, a platform that feels unfinished but maintained. The worker reports it. Supervisors respond in the way large organizations often respond. They verify the door, they lock it, they admonish the worker for entering restricted space, and they move on. The platform is treated as a hazard, not a mystery. But the worker's description spreads because it contains something that does not fit the usual categories. It is not an abandoned ruin, it is too clean. It is not an active platform, it has no schedule. It is in between. This sense of in between becomes the defining atmosphere of the Nightline. Another strand of accounts focuses on equipment movements, specifically the movement of empty trains and maintenance vehicles through Shinjuku's underground at night. These movements are routine. They are also risky. An empty train can be more prone to certain dynamic behaviors, and night crews operate under time pressure to clear the line before morning service. Visibility is reduced. Communication depends on radios and procedural discipline. If a connector tunnel is used, crews must rely on accurate knowledge of gradients, clearances, and signal behavior. In Nightline stories, there is a recurring scenario. An empty train is routed into a section that is supposed to function as a bypass. The control room expects it to reappear at a known junction. Instead, it emerges at a different point, or it emerges late, or it stops responding mid-route. When questioned, the crew describes passing through a segment where the tunnel wall markings, numbers, paint codes, inspection labels do not match the documentation they were given. They describe maintenance lamps that are older than the rest of the system, with different housings. They describe a sound, like a fan or pump, that seems to follow them. Again, none of this requires a ghost. It requires only that a segment exists that was built under a different project with different standards, and that knowledge about it is unevenly distributed across crews. But the story becomes darker when the anomalies shift from infrastructure to human behavior. One of the most troubling patterns described in these accounts is the way certain workers reacted to Nightline assignments. Not with fear in the ordinary sense, but with avoidance that resembled trauma. They would trade shifts, they would feign illness, they would request reassignment without giving reasons. In a culture where direct complaint can carry stigma, the absence of explanation is itself a statement. There are also claims that some crews adopted informal rules: never enter that connector alone, never turn off your work light even for a moment, never remove your gloves, never step off the walkway onto the ballast in a particular segment because the drainage channel is deeper than expected. These rules sound like superstition until you realize they are the kind of rules people develop after someone has been hurt. In one account, a maintenance worker slipped off a narrow walkway and broke an ankle in a section where the drainage channel was unusually deep. The injury itself was not extraordinary. What was extraordinary was the delay in response. Radios did not work reliably in that section. The worker's crew could not raise the control room. They carried the injured worker along the tunnel for an extended distance before communication returned. When they finally reached a point with reliable signal, the control room's response implied that they were not where they said they were. The crew insisted they had followed procedure. The control room insisted the indicators did not match. The argument did not escalate into confrontation, it dissolved into paperwork. The injured worker recovered. The corridor was reviewed. The routing was adjusted. And then, according to the accounts, something changed. The Night Line was no longer treated as a difficult piece of infrastructure. It was treated as an internal embarrassment. Large systems do not like embarrassment. Embarrassment suggests loss of control, and loss of control invites external scrutiny. In transit, scrutiny has consequences: funding decisions, regulatory intervention, public distrust. The simplest way to manage embarrassment is to narrow access and restrict discussion, not because there is a conspiracy in the cinematic sense, but because there is an instinct to protect the system's image. In the Nightline narrative, that narrowing begins quietly. Certain doors become badge access only. Certain maintenance logs are routed through higher-level supervisors. Work orders begin to use vague language, connector inspection, auxiliary passage, instead of specific location tags. In the most disturbing accounts, the line itself is not denied. It is simply not named. People learn to speak around it. At the same time, Shinjuku's night environment continues to generate its own pressure. The district's late-night population includes people who miss last trains, people who sleep in stations until morning, people who are intoxicated or disoriented, people in crisis. Rail operators have protocols for such cases. Police coordinate with station staff. But any system that handles thousands of vulnerable individuals at night will also encounter cases that do not fit protocol. This is where the Nightline's forbidden reputation deepens, because the accounts begin to intersect with missing persons in a way that is never explicit enough to be prosecutable, but is specific enough to disturb. There are stories of individuals last seen entering an underground passage near Shinjuku after midnight, then not reappearing. In Tokyo, missing persons cases can be complex, and many resolve in ways that never become public. The Nightline narrative does not claim that all such cases are connected. It does something more restrained and more unsettling. It claims that in certain cases, security camera coverage ended at a door that was not supposed to be accessible to the public. That door was later found locked. The person was not found in the station. There was no record of them exiting. The case was filed under ordinary categories. The door was quietly upgraded. If you work in transit long enough, you learn that the public-facing system is only part of reality. Behind it is the maintenance system, the security system, the emergency system, and the legal system. The Nightline story exists at the intersection of those systems, where an infrastructure anomaly can become a human anomaly, and where the safest institutional response is to reduce the number of people who know enough to ask questions. By the end of the period described as the Nightline's active years, the story suggests that its use became increasingly restricted, limited to specific operational needs, with crews chosen for familiarity and compliance. This is not presented as sinister selection. It is presented as risk management. Only send the people who will not panic, who will not improvise, who will not talk. But restricting access can also intensify the psychological weight of a place. The fewer people who go there, the more the place becomes defined by what happened there, rather than by what it is used for. A corridor that is rarely entered becomes louder in the mind. A platform that is always dark becomes a site where any minor anomaly feels significant. And then the pattern shifts again, from warnings and discrepancies to incidents that cannot be written off as maintenance friction. The accounts converge on a particular stretch of years, never stated with precision, but consistently placed after the initial expansion era and before the full modernization of later decades, when the Nightline's operational use coincided with a series of events that forced an internal decision. Either invest heavily to make the line safe and document it properly, or close it, and bury it administratively. What makes this decision terrifying is that it is ordinary. It is the kind of decision transit authorities make all the time. The terror comes from what must have occurred to make closure the cheaper option. The darkest period in the Nightline story is not described as a single night. It is described as an accumulation, a slow tightening of procedures around a space that continued to behave unpredictably. The line did not become dangerous because someone declared it dangerous. It became dangerous because workers began to treat it as if it were already responsible for harm. In operational environments, that kind of shift is measurable. It appears in small changes: extra personnel assigned to the same task, longer buffers added to schedules, redundant radio checks, insistence on specific equipment, reluctance to use certain crossovers unless absolutely necessary. These changes do not require a written admission of risk. They can be implemented quietly, and they can be justified as efficiency. But they also reveal something. The system is adapting to a threat it does not want to define. For the Nightline, that threat is described as a convergence of engineering limitation and human vulnerability. Shinjuku's underground spaces are loud, but not in the way most people imagine. It is not constant roaring, it is punctuated, a distant vibration that seems to come from nowhere, then stops, a sudden pressure change when a train passes through a neighboring tunnel, the irregular thud of machinery in a pump room, the hiss of ventilation. The more isolated the corridor, the more each sound feels separate from its source. In restricted spaces, the brain becomes an analyst against its will. Night crews are the people most exposed to this. They work in conditions that reduce the ability to confirm reality: low light, repetitive tasks, fatigue, isolation, and the knowledge that if something goes wrong, it may take time for help to reach them. Their fear is not abstract, it is procedural. It is the fear of being injured in a place where protocols will not arrive fast enough. Accounts from the Nightline's darkest years repeatedly return to one operational practice: late-night rolling stock movements through service connectors near Shinjuku, used to reposition trains for morning demand or to clear tracks for maintenance. These movements are typically done with empty trains, sometimes with minimal crew. The logic is efficient. The risk is that efficiency leaves little margin for confusion. In one commonly repeated account, a two-person crew was assigned to move an empty consist through a connector route that reduced conflict with ongoing maintenance elsewhere. The plan was straightforward: enter a service tunnel, pass through a short intermediate section, emerge at a known junction, then proceed to a yard-facing direction. The control room had the route set, the signals showed clear, the crew acknowledged. They entered the connector at low speed. They reported normal conditions for the first segment. Then the radio transmission changed, not through a dramatic scream, but through the kind of distortion that happens when the tunnel geometry or shielding blocks signal. The control room requested a repeat. There was a pause, then a second transmission, quieter, with the crew member asking for confirmation of their location. The control room responded with the expected block designation. The crew replied that the wall markings did not match. What followed, in the account, is a long silence, not because the crew was necessarily incapacitated, but because the radio no longer worked. For the control room, this is not unusual in short bursts. For a few seconds, a train can pass through a dead zone, but the dead zone did not end. The indicators showed the train occupying a block longer than expected, then showed it clearing without appearing in the next block. It was as if the train had slipped out of the track circuit logic. The control room initiated contingency procedures. They assumed a fault. track circuit failure, signal relay irregularity, a wheel-rail contact issue. They prepared to halt other movements. They attempted to reach the crew again. Still nothing. Minutes passed. In an underground system, minutes are heavy. They represent not only delay, but exposure. Exposure to electrical hazards, to unknown obstacles, to the possibility of a stopped train in a tunnel with limited egress. When the train finally reappeared, it did so on a segment where it should not have been, moving slowly with headlights dimmed. The crew member in the front cab looked exhausted and did not respond immediately to the control room's repeated calls. When communication resumed, the crew reported that they had passed through a section that appeared to split, one path marked by standard maintenance labels, another path with no markings. They had followed the route they believed was correct. Then they realized, by gradient and curvature, that they were not on the documented connector. That report triggered an internal investigation, according to the accounts, but the investigation did not produce a clear mechanical cause. The line was inspected, the track circuits were tested, the signals were reviewed. The findings in the stories telling were ambiguous. No definitive fault, no definitive explanation for the train's tracking disappearance. This is the point at which the Nightline narrative becomes less about tunnels and more about institutional behavior. Because if you cannot prove a fault in an environment where safety depends on fault detection, you are left with a more disturbing possibility. The system contains unknowns that standard procedures cannot map. Some accounts insist the missing blocks were not missing at all. They suggest that a physical connector existed that was not represented correctly in the control logic, an unlisted turnout, a junction that could be set mechanically or by human intervention without appearing in the control room's normal indicators. In older systems, certain maintenance switches and emergency crossovers can exist outside standard routing. If such a switch were present, it could redirect the train into a segment the control room could not fully monitor. If that were true, the horror is not supernatural. It is bureaucratic and mechanical. A system that appears controlled is, in parts, blind. And if a blind segment exists under Shinjuku and is used at night, it becomes a place where incidents can occur without immediate documentation. It is in this context that the Nightline's most disturbing claims take shape, not of apparitions, but of disappearances that feel like administrative errors until you examine how infrastructure can erase a person. A person does not have to vanish in an impossible way to be lost. They can step through an access door that was not properly secured. They can fall into a service trench. They can enter a tunnel during maintenance and be struck by a vehicle. They can become trapped behind a locked gate if a crew changes shift and assumes the area is clear. They can die in a place that is difficult to reach, and the delay in discovery can transform the event into something else, something less like an accident and more like an absence. Nightline accounts describe a case involving a subcontractor assigned to cable inspection. The work required moving through a corridor near Shinjuku's deeper infrastructure, checking junction boxes and conduit runs. The subcontractor was seen by a crew leader entering a service passage. The crew leader later reported not seeing him again. At first, the assumption was simple. The subcontractor had finished early and returned by a different route, or had stepped out for a break. But the next shift did not find him. His badge was not logged out, his tools were not returned. A search was initiated. The station areas were checked, then the known maintenance corridors. The subcontractor's name was reported to police in the standard way. The next day, there was no sign of him in the public spaces. By the third day, internal attention increased, but not publicly. The search expanded into less used areas, locked doors, sealed corridors, storage rooms. The line between transit authority procedure and police procedure blurred. Some areas required coordination between companies. The subcontractor was found, according to the account, in a tunnel segment that was not part of the standard route. He was not found by walking casually. He was found because a maintenance team reported an odor near an access hatch, and because a supervisor decided to check a space that was not in the normal search plan. The description of the location is consistent across versions: a narrow walkway, an older wall finish, a section with unusual drainage. The subcontractor's body position suggested he had attempted to move, perhaps to reach a communication point, perhaps to climb. His flashlight was nearby. The most disturbing detail in these accounts is not the death itself, but the question of time. If he was trapped, how long had he been alive after he disappeared? How long did he listen to the tunnels without being able to signal anyone? The official record in the Nightline narrative does not become public. It is handled as an internal incident. The family is notified, compensation is arranged, and the system continues. But within worker culture, the location becomes charged. People remember not because of ghosts, but because they can imagine themselves there. After that, the Nightline is said to have entered a phase of escalating restrictions. Certain contractors were no longer permitted in specific corridors without direct supervision. Certain access points were rekeyed. Radios were tested more aggressively. Work lights were installed in places that had been left dark. But even these measures did not resolve the core issue, because the core issue was not a loose cable or a bad relay. It was the existence of a segment that could not be made fully legible to the people required to operate within it. During the same period, other incidents are described, smaller, more ambiguous, harder to verify. A maintenance worker who reported hearing a train approaching when the control room insisted no movement was scheduled, then later found a faint smear of metal dust on the railhead, as if a vehicle had passed. A security guard who found a door unlocked that should have been sealed, then discovered it was locked again on return, with no record of anyone accessing it. A cleaner who claimed to have seen platform lights turn on in a closed area, then turn off as she approached. These are the kinds of accounts that can be dismissed as fatigue, miscommunication, and the human tendency to fill gaps. But their repetition matters, not because repetition proves truth, but because repetition shows what people are trying to explain. They are trying to explain the sensation of being watched by a system that does not care about them. A machine can feel predatory if it continues operating in spaces where humans are fragile. The Nightline's darkest period is also linked in the narrative to a particular administrative decision, the decision to stop using certain routes except in emergency. That decision is not dramatic. It is written in the language of risk mitigation. It is implemented with signage that the public never sees. It is enforced by supervisors whose names are not known outside the organization. And then, according to the accounts, there is one final event that forces closure. The details vary, but the structure is consistent: a late-night movement, a discrepancy in tracking, a delay, and the discovery that the train returned with someone missing. Not a passenger, a worker, someone whose presence should have been recorded, whose absence should have been immediately resolvable. In the most restrained version, a crew member disembarked in a connector segment to inspect a suspected obstruction or equipment fault. The train remained stopped. The other crew member waited, attempted radio contact, then left the cab to search. The crew member was not found. Control procedures were initiated. The tunnel was searched. The missing worker was not located that night. A system can tolerate many kinds of failure. It cannot tolerate the possibility that someone can step off a train into a managed space and not be recoverable within the operational window. Because if that is possible, then safety is not a function of planning, it is a function of luck. The aftermath of that event, according to the Nightline accounts, was swift in the way institutions are swift when they decide to contain. The route was taken out of standard night operations, access points were sealed, documents were reclassified or relocated, people were instructed, informally, not to discuss it. The line became something that existed physically, but not narratively. And that is where the horror deepens, because it is not the disappearance itself that lingers, it is the shape of the response. A city that relies on underground certainty cannot afford to admit that uncertainty exists beneath its busiest station.
so it does what modern systems often do when they cannot correct a problem. It makes the problem harder to name.
In the years after the Nightline's active use is said to have ended, Shinjuku continued to expand. Renovations reshaped concourses, new commercial spaces opened and closed, signage changed. The station's public geometry shifted, as if the surface world itself were rewriting the map to keep pace with demand. If the Nightline was sealed, it would not have remained untouched. Tokyo does not allow empty space to remain empty for long. It would have been repurposed, reinforced, rerouted, or entombed behind newer infrastructure. And yet, the most persistent quality of the Nightline narrative is that it never resolves into a clear ruin. It does not become a known abandoned station that can be photographed from a distance. It becomes a blank space in worker memory, a place that remains present in procedure even after it is removed from routine. This is how forbidden infrastructure survives, not as a destination, but as an exception. A sealed corridor still requires inspection, even if only for structural integrity. A disused tunnel still requires water management because groundwater does not respect administrative decisions. Ventilation patterns still interact with it because air moves through connected volumes whether they are mapped or not. Fire codes still require knowing what spaces exist even if they are not used. In other words, the Nightline, if it exists, cannot be erased without leaving technical obligations behind. Those obligations in the accounts are where the story becomes most quietly disturbing. Workers who came later, younger staff who never saw the line in active use, would still encounter traces, a locked door with a different kind of keyway, an access panel that is always listed on inspection checklists but never opened, a maintenance note that instructs crews to avoid auxiliary passage during night work without explaining why. In these details, the horror is not a monster, it is inheritance. A new generation inherits prohibitions without context. They inherit a rule that is obeyed because disobedience requires justification, and justification requires asking questions that no one wants to answer. One reason such stories persist in Shinjuku is that the district produces a steady supply of ambiguous experiences. People get lost underground, they stumble into service corridors, they wander late at night through passages that are half public, half private. They encounter closed shutters and silent stairwells. In a district this dense, coincidence can feel like design. When someone claims they found a platform that was not on the map, the claim is easy to dismiss as confusion, because Shinjuku's underground is confusing by default. But the Nightline narrative survives because it offers a framework that makes confusion feel purposeful. It suggests that the disorientation is not merely an accident of architecture, but a byproduct of containment. The system is confusing because confusion prevents certain paths from being taken. In the aftermath period, the story shifts from incidents to documentation, or more precisely, to the absence of documentation. Transit authorities document relentlessly. They maintain logs, maintenance schedules, inspection results, incident reports, employee rosters, contractor records. But documentation is not the same as transparency. Documents can be compartmentalized. They can be archived in ways that make retrieval difficult. They can be written in language that is technically accurate, but practically opaque. And in certain cases, documents can be removed from ordinary circulation through internal classification, not necessarily through a dramatic cover-up, but through routine legal and reputational risk management. Those obligations in the accounts are where the story becomes most quietly disturbing. Workers who came later, younger staff who never saw the line in active use, would still encounter traces, a locked door with a different kind of keyway, an access panel that is always listed on inspection checklists but never opened, a maintenance note that instructs crews to avoid auxiliary passage during night work without explaining why. In these details, the horror is not a monster, it is inheritance. A new generation inherits prohibitions without context. They inherit a rule that is obeyed because disobedience requires justification, and justification requires asking questions that no one wants to answer.
One reason such stories persist in Shinjuku is that the district produces a steady supply of ambiguous experiences. People get lost underground, they stumble into service corridors, they wander late at night through passages that are half public, half private. They encounter closed shutters and silent stairwells. In a district this dense, coincidence can feel like design. When someone claims they found a platform that was not on the map, the claim is easy to dismiss as confusion, because Shinjuku's underground is confusing by default. But the Nightline narrative survives because it offers a framework that makes confusion feel purposeful. It suggests that the disorientation is not merely an accident of architecture, but a byproduct of containment. The system is confusing because confusion prevents certain paths from being taken. In the aftermath period, the story shifts from incidents to documentation, or more precisely, to the absence of documentation. Transit authorities document relentlessly. They maintain logs, maintenance schedules, inspection results, incident reports, employee rosters, contractor records. But documentation is not the same as transparency. Documents can be compartmentalized. They can be archived in ways that make retrieval difficult. They can be written in language that is technically accurate, but practically opaque. And in certain cases, documents can be removed from ordinary circulation through internal classification, not necessarily through a dramatic cover-up, but through routine legal and reputational risk management. Those obligations in the account are where the story becomes most quietly disturbing. Workers who came later, younger staff who never saw the line in active use, would still encounter traces: a locked door with a different kind of keyway, an access panel that is always listed on inspection checklists but never opened, a maintenance note that instructs crews to avoid auxiliary passage during night work without explaining why. In these details, the horror is not a monster, it is inheritance. A new generation inherits prohibitions without context. They inherit a rule that is obeyed because disobedience requires justification, and justification requires asking questions that no one wants to answer. This partiality is its own form of terror. It implies that knowledge exists but is withheld. And withholding does not have to be malicious to be frightening. It can be simply bureaucratic. Some of the most unsettling accounts come from emergency services rather than rail staff. Firefighters and police who respond to incidents in Shinjuku's underground are trained to navigate complex spaces. They rely on pre-plans, access keys, station staff guidance. When they speak about sealed infrastructure, they do so in the language of risk, unknown voids, smoke migration, confusing egress routes. In the Nightline narrative, there are claims of emergency response teams encountering doors in deep corridors marked with warning signage that does not match standard station safety signs, and being told by station management not to open them even during drills. If true, this would not necessarily be a cover-up. It could be a practical decision, a door that opens into an unsafe, unlit segment that would complicate evacuation rather than help it. But the effect on human imagination is the same. A door that exists in an emergency corridor and is not to be used during emergency becomes an object of dread. There is also the psychological aftermath among workers. In rail environments, trauma often appears as caution rather than confession. A worker may not say, "I am haunted." They say, "I don't like that route." They say, "Don't take new staff there." They say, "Stay with your partner." They say, "If the radio cuts out, go back." These phrases have a calmness that is more disturbing than panic because they imply experience. The Nightline narrative suggests that for some workers, Shinjuku's underground retained a specific kind of tension even after closure. Not the general tension of nighttime maintenance, but a focused aversion to certain depths and corridors. The fear was not of seeing something, it was of being unseen, of being in a place where, if they disappeared, the system would not immediately know how to find them. That fear aligns with a real structural truth of complex transit systems. Not every space is equally observable. Cameras do not cover every service corridor. Track circuits do not monitor every maintenance segment. Radios do not work equally well in every tunnel. A person can step into a gap in coverage, and the system will not notice until something fails downstream. The Nightline story adds a layer. The gap is not incidental, it is known. It is maintained as a gap because making it fully legible would require admitting that it exists and explaining why it was built that way. In some versions of the narrative, the Nightline did not remain completely sealed. It remained usable in extreme circumstances: earthquakes, major disruptions, events requiring rapid rolling stock repositioning. Tokyo's disaster preparedness is real, and emergency routing is part of transit resilience. If an auxiliary segment existed, it might be kept structurally sound, even if not routinely used. But using it would require selecting crews who knew it, crews who would not ask for public acknowledgement. This possibility is perhaps the most unsettling, because it suggests that even after the line's closure, it could still be activated, quietly, when the city's needs override its fears. It would not carry passengers, it would carry necessity, and the people operating it would do so with the knowledge that their route is not meant to be part of the story the city tells itself. The Nightline's lasting presence, then, is not a matter of ongoing incidents. It is a matter of the way absence becomes embedded in routine. Shinjuku at night continues to produce its own kind of silence. After the last trains, shutters close, the bright concourses dim. The remaining lights create a pale, functional atmosphere. Cleaning teams move methodically. Security staff watch monitors. In some corridors, air handlers cycle with a low mechanical rhythm. Somewhere deeper, pumps continue to move water away from spaces that are not meant to flood. The station is still alive, but it is no longer performing for the public. In that environment, even ordinary maintenance becomes an encounter with the city's hidden anatomy. A worker opens a panel and finds old wiring routed in a way that suggests prior construction phases. A crew follows a conduit and discovers it disappears behind a sealed wall. A supervisor reviews a map that contains a notation that no one can explain. The station's present is layered over its past, and the past does not always stay quiet. The Nightline story remains compelling because it offers a realistic form of horror, the horror of a modern system that depends on spaces it cannot fully account for. It is not a ghost story in a conventional sense. It is a story about institutional memory, about the limits of documentation, about how a city can decide not to look directly at a problem if looking would require admitting that the problem exists beneath the most heavily trafficked station in the country. There are no reliable public photographs of the Nightline, no official map that confirms it, no plaque, no guided tour. If it exists in the way many difficult truths exist inside complex organizations, as a known unknown, a place whose name is avoided because naming invites questions, and questions invite accountability. And yet, the Nightline is not entirely absent. It persists in the small details: the locked door in a staff-only corridor that is newer than the walls around it, the ventilation grate that emits colder air than it should, the access hatch whose bolts are replaced more often than nearby hatches, as if someone is still opening it, the line item in a maintenance budget that does not correspond to any public asset. In the end, the most frightening aspect is not what might be inside that sealed segment, it is what the segment represents. That beneath a city defined by precision and control, there are spaces built under pressure, modified by necessity, and then set aside when they become too costly, financially, politically, psychologically, to confront. Shinjuku continues to function. Trains continue to arrive with exactness. People continue to descend into the underground without thinking about the volume of concrete beneath their feet. That is the success of the system, and it is also the condition that allows a place like the Nightline, if it exists, to remain where it is, present, maintained, and unspoken. Because in the modern city, the deepest fear is not that something impossible is happening. The deepest fear is that something entirely possible happened once, and the system chose to survive by forgetting it.